A billionaire father watches as a waitress feeds his disabled son and changes her life forever. The rain was falling heavily against the windows of the small café in Munich. The streets were slick, and the headlights of cars reflected off the wet asphalt. Barbara Weber was tiredly wiping down the counter, the scent of fresh coffee filling the air. Her long workday was nearing its end, but her mind was elsewhere, on overdue rent, a broken bicycle she couldn't afford to fix, and the never-ending battle of life that she seemed to always be losing. "Barbara, you can close up now," her colleague Theo called from the kitchen. "Yeah, just taking out the trash," she replied with a sigh, slipping on her jacket. She grabbed the bags of garbage and headed out into the rain, unaware that this moment would change her life forever. The rain had grown heavier. Barbara pulled her jacket tighter around her neck as she glanced down the dark street. That's when she saw him, a young boy no older than 7, sitting alone in a wheelchair in the downpour. His blonde hair was soaked and his pale face was flushed from the cold. Barbara's heart tightened. "Hey, what are you doing out here? Where are your parents?" she asked as she kneeled beside him, her voice gentle yet concerned. The boy was trembling, his hands gripping the arms of his wheelchair. "I don't know," his voice was faint and anxious. Without a second thought, Barbara didn't hesitate. She couldn't leave him there. "Come inside. I'll make you some hot chocolate." As she pushed him through the cafe door, neither of them realized they were being watched. Barbara removed David's soaked jacket and wrapped him in a warm blanket. "You'll be okay," she smiled encouragingly. The boy nodded shyly, holding the steaming mug of hot chocolate with both hands. "You're really nice," he murmured finally. Barbara smiled softly, looking down at him. "Oh, I'm just a waitress with a lot of compassion." Outside, protected by the tinted windows of a black SUV, sat Enrique Falk, 45 years old, observing the scene. His expression was serious and his fingers tapped slowly on the steering wheel. He was accustomed to people seeing his son differently, reacting with pity, uncertainty, or keeping their distance. But this woman treated David as if he were just a child, and that was something Enrique Falk couldn't ignore. Enrique leaned back, his gaze fixed on Barbara. Who was she? A simple waitress who knew nothing about his wealth? A stranger who had helped without hesitation? His assistant, Wesley, cleared his throat from the passenger seat. "Sir, do you want to intervene?" Enrique didn't respond immediately. His gaze wandered back to David, who was now smiling as he spoke with Barbara. When was the last time he had seen his son so carefree? He took a deep breath. "Find out who she is." The lights from the dock reflected off the tall windows of the Falk Tower as Enrique sat in his office, file in hand. "Barbara Weber," he murmured, flipping through the pages. Wesley stood discreetly beside him. "Our research shows she worked as a waitress for 3 years. Before that, she worked at a small family-owned business, but she had to file for bankruptcy," Wesley reported. Enrique examined the file more closely. "No special education, no qualifications, no connections to the press or business circles," he said thoughtfully. "None," confirmed Wesley. Enrique leaned against the desk. "And yet, she's the only one who treats David without prejudice." Leslie hesitated. "What exactly do you have in mind for her, Mr. Falk?" Enrique stared out the window. "I'll find out myself." The next morning, Barbara was back at her cafe. The incident with David lingered in her mind, but life went on, until a black Bentley pulled up right in front of the door. Conversations in the cafe came to an abrupt halt as Enrique Falk stepped out, his tailored suit sharp and controlled. He exuded a charisma that suggested he was a man who rarely had to ask for anything, and now he was walking into her small cafe. Barbara noticed him immediately, not because of his clothes but because of his presence. He observed her with an intensity, as if he were trying to decipher her. He walked up to the counter. "Barbara Weber?" he asked. She paused, her heart racing. "Yes, that's me. I'm Enrique Falk. We need to talk." "Please have a seat," he said calmly, settling into a corner of the cafe. Barbara crossed her arms. "If you're here because I took your son with me, I just wanted to help him." Enrique studied her for a moment before shaking his head. "I'm not here to complain. Quite the opposite." Barbara raised an eyebrow. "Then why?" Enrique leaned back. "I've been thinking about you. About people like you and people like me." She laughed dryly. "What does that mean?" "Waitresses with a lot of sympathy," he said. Enrique barely flinched. The corners of his mouth curved almost imperceptibly. "Waitresses with compassion are rare. Even rarer are the people who aren't impressed by status or money." Barbara remained silent. Then she asked, "What is it that you want?" Enrique handed her a business card. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., my office at Fok Tower. Why? Barbara asked. He looked at her as if the answer were obvious. Because I'm going to make you an offer. The rest of the day felt surreal to Barbara. She held the business card in her hand, spinning it between her fingers. Enrique Fok, CEO of Fok Group. Why would a billionaire want to talk to her? Barbara, you've been staring at that card for 5 minutes, her colleague Theo commented, smiling. I don't know if I should go. He's one of the most powerful men in Germany. What do I have to lose? She bit her lip, torn between doubt and curiosity. If she went, she'd be stepping into a world that wasn't hers, but if she didn't, she'd always wonder what could have been. Want to know how this story ends? If you're curious to see how this narrative full of twists and turns plays out, subscribe now. We still have so much more to show, and you won't want to miss the details that will surprise you. Take a moment to subscribe to Hidden Raylit, like the video, share it with your friends, and leave a comment letting us know what you think so far. Keep watching to find out how this emotional story unfolds. The next morning, as Barbara stood in front of the Fok Tower, she felt for the first time in her life that she didn't belong there. The towering buildings above Munich, huge glass windows reflecting the blue sky, men in suits with briefcases rushing through the revolving doors, smartphones pressed to their ears, faces filled with important thoughts. And she was just a waitress in an old denim jacket. Can I help you? Asked the receptionist, already eyeing her with skepticism. Barbara took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and handed over the card. I have an appointment with Enrique Fok. In an instant, the woman's demeanor shifted. Her eyes widened slightly, and her voice became more polite. Of course, Mr. Fok is expecting you. With those words, Barbara stepped into a world that wasn't hers. Enrique noticed when Barbara entered his office. She took in the room, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of Munich, a minimalist desk made of dark wood, an atmosphere of perfection and control. I thought to myself, if a billionaire invites me, I shouldn't be late, she said as she sat down across from him. Enrique looked at her with a hint of a smile. She wasn't afraid. You like that? Let's get straight to the point, he leaned back. I want you to work for me. Barbara blinked. What? I need someone to handle certain things. Someone who isn't from this world and can see me and my son with different eyes. You don't need an assistant. You need a reality check. She gave a light laugh. Call it what you want. The offer still stands. Barbara didn't know what to say, but what she didn't know was that not everyone at Fok Tower agreed with her arrival. So, she's the waitress? 2 employees whispered as Barbara walked down the hallway. She could feel their skeptical stares, their silent, disparaging remarks. Probably just a whim of Mr. Fok's. She won't last a week. Barbara kept her head high, ignoring them, but inside, she felt the uncertainty growing. When she arrived at Enrique's office, he was already sitting at his desk. Difficult first hour? He asked without taking his eyes off his papers. Barbara sat down across from him. Oh, fantastic. I love when people treat me like I'm invisible. Enrique raised an eyebrow. So, you fit right in here. I'm also ignored a lot. She looked at him skeptically. You're Enrique Fok. Who dares to ignore you? A small smile tugged at his lips. More people than you think. A brief moment of silence passed, a moment of understanding, before Barbara even realized she was laughing, and Enrique noticed it had been a long time since he'd heard someone laugh like that. Later that night, Barbara sat in the lounge area, flipping through some documents when a familiar voice broke her thoughts. Have you regretted it yet? She looked up at Enrique, standing in front of her with 2 glasses in hand, one with whiskey and the other with water. He handed her the water. Not yet, she replied, taking a sip. But I do wonder why I'm here. Enrique leaned back. They're here because they're different. She laughed softly. Sounds like I'm some sort of experiment. Enrique remained silent for a moment. Maybe, but it's an experiment I like so far. His voice was calm, his gaze attentive, and suddenly the air between them felt different. But before Barbara could respond, Enrique's phone rang. He glanced at it, stood up, and transformed back into the Enrique Fok the world knew. We'll talk later, he said, walking away. Barbara felt that he hadn't been talking just about work. The Fok Tower was in turmoil that night. Confidential information from Enrique's company had leaked to the press. Business strategies, confidential contracts, everything suddenly made public. In a dark conference room, Enrique stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable, while his security team spoke. We've checked the internal access logs, said one of the officers, his voice serious. The data was stolen from a company computer. Enrique didn't respond. The point of access was Barbara's computer. A cold silence filled the room. Enrique slowly looked up, his face betraying nothing, but inside, something began to break. Barbara knew something was wrong when she walked into the office. The glances, the sudden silence, the feeling of being watched. Then Enrique stood in front of her. "In my office. Now." His voice was cold, offering no room for discussion. Barbara followed him, her heart pounding. As soon as the door closed behind her, he slammed a stack of printed materials onto the desk. "Do you want to tell me something?" Barbara frowned and flipped through the papers. Then she froze. "It should have been me." Enrique crossed his arms. "The evidence is clear. It was your access." Barbara's voice trembled. "I didn't do this. I would never do this. Give me one reason to believe you." His eyes were cold, harder than ever, and the pain in them was more intense than anything Barbara had ever felt. She could feel her stomach tighten. "I can't believe you think that," she whispered. Enrique looked at her, his gaze not filled with anger but with doubt. "Someone was using my computer," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "I'm not stupid, Enrique. Why would I do that, knowing everything can be traced back?" He pressed his lips together and turned away, taking a few steps around the room. "I don't know." Barbara felt her heart drop. "You don't believe me. It doesn't make sense, but I don't know." And in that moment she realized he didn't trust her. Barbara sat down on her small sofa, staring into space. Enrique hadn't fired her directly, but he hadn't believed her either, and that was almost worse. She let the last few days replay in her mind, searching for something she'd missed. Then it hit her, the man in the cafe a few weeks before. A customer who had asked far too many questions about the F group, about Enrique. He had seemed friendly, but now, looking back, everything seemed so calculated. Barbara's hands clenched into fists. If no one else would fight for her, then she would have to do it herself. She stood in front of a small, discreet office door. She had discovered the name of the man, Antonio Marquez, a consultant who had been at the cafe weeks ago. Her heart was racing. She knew she wouldn't find any hard evidence here, but she needed answers. When the door opened, Antonio froze. "What do you want?" "I know it was you who leaked the information," Barbara said calmly but firmly. He laughed. "Do you have any evidence?" Barbara raised her phone. "This conversation is being recorded." Antonio's smile faded. "Enrique Falk will hear this. Let's see how safe you still feel then." His face went pale. "Wait, we can't." "Certainly not," she interrupted. "I'm done being pushed around." And with those words she turned and walked out, leaving him standing there. Enrique was sitting in his office when his phone rang. "What is this?" His voice sounded exhausted. He had barely slept since Barbara left. But what he heard next made him stand up. "Enrique, I have proof," Barbara said. On the other end of the line, he was silent for a moment before she added, "I can prove to you that I'm innocent." 10 minutes later she was in his office, her gaze hard, chin lifted. She wasn't here to apologize. "Antonio Marquez stole the information and sold it," she said, placing the phone on his desk. Enrique hit play. Antonio's voice, his confession, was all there. A deep, heavy breath escaped Enrique as he processed what he was hearing. He looked up at Barbara. In his eyes wasn't just relief, but guilt. "Barbara." His voice was low. "Keep it," she said coldly. "I just wanted you to know the truth." With that she turned and walked out. Enrique watched her leave, and for the first time in years he felt powerless. Days passed. Barbara didn't contact him again. Enrique did everything he could to limit the damage. Antonio was caught, and the media reported the scandal. But he didn't care because the only thing that truly mattered wasn't here. Finally he couldn't take it any longer. He drove to the small cafe where it all started. And there she was. Barbara sat alone at a table, a cup of coffee in front of her, her gaze lost in the emptiness. Enrique took a deep breath and walked toward her. "You're just sitting there like nothing ever happened?" she asked, not looking up. He pulled the chair back and sat down. "I can't change what happened," he said, his voice heavy. "I doubted you, Barbara. But I can say that was my biggest mistake." Silence hung between them. Then she finally looked at him. In her eyes there was still hurt, but something else too. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Enrique." He sighed slowly. "Then let me prove to you that I'm worth it." There was a moment of stillness. A breath. Then Barbara pushed her cup of coffee toward him. "Start with this," she said. "Pay for the coffee." Enrique blinked, then slowly she smiled. And in that moment she knew, it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. If you enjoyed this story full of twists, emotions, and life lessons, don't miss the next ones we share at Hidden Raylet. Click the subscribe button and activate the bell to get notified whenever we post a new video. Follow real stories that inspire, move, and make you reflect. Subscribe now and be part of our positive team.